The morning light was coming through the kitchen window the same way it always had, soft and golden, catching the dust in the air above the breakfast table. But nothing else in my life was the same. My husband of 41 years had been buried 4 days earlier, and I was standing at the sink, washing a single coffee mug, thinking that I had never truly understood the word alone until that moment. The phone rang before I finished drying my hands. It was my son. "Mom," Daniel said, and there was something in his voice I couldn't quite place at first. Not grief, not the exhausted tenderness of a son checking on his mother. Something else, something measured and prepared, like he had rehearsed what came next. "Brenda and I have been talking. We think you should come stay with us for a while, just until things settle down." I told him I appreciated that. I told him I was managing. "It's a big house for one person," he said. I looked around the kitchen, the copper pots hanging above the stove that Robert had bought me for our 20th anniversary, the blue curtains I had sewn myself the summer Daniel was born, the crack in the plaster near the back door that Robert had promised to fix for 11 years and never did, and that I had grown to love the way you love someone's small imperfections. "It's my home," I said. There was a pause. "Of course," Daniel said. "Of course it is. I just meant we worry about you." I thanked him. We said goodbye. I set the phone down on the counter and stood very still for a long time. His name was Robert Allen Calloway, and he had loved me with a quietness and a steadiness that I did not always deserve. We had not been a dramatic couple. We had not fought loudly or loved loudly. We had built something slow and solid over 4 decades, a house in Maplewood, New Jersey, a son, a life full of ordinary Saturdays and grocery lists and road trips, with bad directions, and the particular pleasure of knowing exactly how someone takes their coffee. He died on a Tuesday in late October. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in July, gone by fall. 3 months. The doctors said some people had longer. We were not some people. The day we came home from his final hospital stay, when we knew it was the final one, Robert took my hand in the car and said, "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," I said, and I meant it. "Don't let them make your decisions for you." He squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than you think you are, Margaret. You always have been. Just don't forget it when I'm not around to remind you." I promised him. I held his hand all the way home, and I kept holding it even after we pulled into the driveway, neither of us wanting to be the first to let go. The calls started before the thank you notes from the funeral had been written. Daniel called again 4 days after the first conversation. This time Brenda was on the line too, her voice bright and efficient in the particular way of someone who has already made a decision and is now informing you of it. "We've actually been doing some research," she said, "about the housing market in this area. Mom, the values have gone up significantly. Your house could sell for quite a lot right now." I set down my pen. I had been writing to Robert's sister in Phoenix, telling her about the service, about the flowers, about the way the afternoon light had fallen through the chapel windows. "I'm not selling my house," I said. "We're not saying you have to," Daniel said quickly. He always softened Brenda's edges when he thought I'd noticed them. "We just think it's worth considering. You'd have the equity. You could live somewhere smaller, easier to manage." "Where exactly am I supposed to live, Daniel?" "With us," Brenda said. "We have the guest room. It's actually very nice. We just redid the floors." I thought about the guest room in their house in Scottsdale. Beige walls. A bed with too many decorative pillows. A window that faced a concrete wall. I thought about living at Brenda's mercy, folding myself into the corners of her carefully organized life, asking permission to use the kitchen, listening to her talk about real estate values at the dinner table. "I'll think about it," I said. I had no intention of thinking about it. 2 weeks after the funeral, Daniel drove up from New Jersey without telling me he was coming. I heard his car in the driveway at 10 in the morning on a Wednesday and felt something cold settle in my chest before I even opened the door. He had a folder under his arm. He kissed me on the cheek and smelled like coffee and airplane and Brenda's perfume, and I knew she had sent him. "I wasn't expecting you," I said. "I wanted to see you." He sat down at the kitchen table and opened the folder before I had even put the kettle on. "I talked to a realtor, Mom, just to get a sense of things. The house could list at—" "I didn't ask you to talk to a realtor." "I know, but I was trying to help. He looked up at me with those brown eyes that had always been his father's eyes, and I felt the old ache of loving someone and being disappointed by them at the same time. Dad would have wanted you to be taken care of. Your father wanted me to make my own decisions. Daniel pressed his lips together. He looked down at the folder. The thing is, Mom, this house has 4 bedrooms. The property taxes alone. I know what the property taxes are. I've been paying them for 37 years. You were paying them together. It's different now. That landed the way he must have known it would. I turned to face the window so he wouldn't see my expression. Outside, the oak tree in the backyard was bare. Robert had planted that tree the year we moved in, when it was barely taller than Daniel was as a little boy. Now it was enormous. It would outlast all of us. Leave the folder, I said. I'll look at it. Daniel left. I put the folder in the drawer beneath the telephone, on top of the other folder he didn't know about. Then I stood at the kitchen window for a long time, watching the oak tree, and I thought about a small white house on the coast of Maine and a woman named Dorothy Chen who had been my best friend for 34 years. Dorothy and I had met at a school fundraiser in 1991 when our sons were in the same second-grade class. We had been placed next to each other at a table selling baked goods, and within 45 minutes we had solved each other's most pressing problems and made each other laugh harder than either of us had in months. And from that day forward, we had been inseparable in the way that certain friendships are not dependent on proximity or frequency, but on something deeper that doesn't require maintenance. When Dorothy's husband left her in 2009, she moved to a small coastal town in Maine called Pembroke. She bought a little house on a hill above the harbor with the settlement money, painted the shutters dark green, and told me it was the first place she had ever lived that felt entirely like her own. I visited her that first summer and fell in love with the town the way you fall in love with something you didn't know you were looking for. The harbor, the smell of salt and pine, the particular quality of the light in the early morning, blue and clean and full of promise. Robert came with me the second summer. He stood on Dorothy's porch and looked out at the water and said, "This is a place where a person could breathe." We started talking, the 3 of us, about the possibility of something, just a small place, just for us to use when we wanted to escape. Robert had an old retirement account from his first job, one neither of us had touched in over 20 years. We made some calls. Dorothy knew a woman whose mother was selling a small Cape-style house, 3 streets up from the harbor, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with good light, a porch that looked south toward the water. We bought it in 2018 and told almost no one. It wasn't a secret born out of deception. It was a secret born out of self-preservation, out of the knowledge, which Robert and I had arrived at quietly and without discussion, that there are some things in a marriage that belong only to the 2 people inside it. Daniel and Brenda had strong opinions about finances. They had strong opinions about everything. The house in Maine was the one thing that was entirely ours, and we wanted to keep it that way. After Robert died, it became the one thing that was entirely mine. The calls did not stop. They became, if anything, more organized. Brenda began sending me links to articles. Downsizing after loss. A guide for widows. Why selling your home might be the best decision you ever make. Senior living communities in New Jersey. What to expect. I read them all and deleted them and did not respond. Daniel called every Sunday. The calls had a structure to them now. He would ask how I was doing. I would say I was fine, and then he would move carefully toward whatever Brenda had decided needed to be said that week. The guest room was ready whenever I wanted it. The realtor had a window in early spring that would be good for listing. Had I thought about the practicalities of maintaining such a large property on my own? I had thought about them. I thought about them while I was replacing the burnt-out bulb in the upstairs hallway, and while I was dragging the garbage cans out to the curb, and while I was trying to figure out the new settings on the thermostat that Robert had always managed. Some of these things were genuinely hard. Some of them made me cry in the way that grief finds you not in the large dramatic moments, but in the small ones, the ones where someone's absence makes itself known through a light bulb or a thermostat, or the simple fact that there is no one to call when you hear an unfamiliar sound at night. But I was not going to Scottsdale, and I was not going to a senior living community in New Jersey, and I was not going to sell my house on their timeline because it was convenient for them. What I was going to do was drive to Maine in April. I had been planning it since November. Dorothy knew, of course. We had talked every week since Robert died. And she was the one who finally said it plainly. "Margaret, they're going to keep pushing until you give them something." Don't give them anything. Come up here. The house is waiting for you. I started quietly. A box of books, sent ahead. The good quilt from the cedar chest. The one my mother had made. Photographs. The copper pot Robert had given me for our anniversary. I would not be leaving that behind. I was methodical about it. I did not rush. Every week, a few more things made their way north, some in boxes Dorothy collected at her house, some in the back of my car during the 2 trips I made without telling anyone where I was going. The house in Maine had been furnished simply when we bought it, and we had added to it slowly over the years. A rocking chair from a shop in Camden, a small writing desk I had found at an estate sale in Bath. It was not large or grand. It was exactly right. I continued paying the utilities in Maplewood. I continued answering Daniel's Sunday calls. I continued being, from his perspective, a 6-7-year-old widow managing a 4-bedroom house in New Jersey, perhaps wearing down, perhaps coming around, perhaps nearly ready to be reasonable. The letter arrived on a Friday in early March. It was addressed to me in the formal way that serious things arrive, my full name, typed, on a business envelope. I opened it at the kitchen table with my reading glasses and a cup of coffee, and read it twice before I fully understood what I was holding. Daniel had retained a real estate attorney. Not to sell the house, he had no legal authority to sell my house, but to send a formal letter, very carefully worded, informing me that he and Brenda had spoken with an estate planning specialist, and that given the current financial landscape, they had concerns about the property and wanted to discuss its future management in a structured setting. Structured setting. Those were the words. Brenda had chosen those words. I set the letter down. I looked out the window at the oak tree. I thought about Robert's hands, the particular way he used to drum his fingers on the steering wheel when he was working through a problem, and I thought about his voice in the car on that last drive home. Don't let them make your decisions for you. I thought about a porch that looked south toward the water, and the sound the harbor made in the early morning, and the way the light came through the east window of the kitchen in the little white house on the hill in Pembroke, Maine. I picked up the phone and called Dorothy. It's time, I said. I did not argue with the letter. I did not call Daniel. I did not schedule the structured meeting Brenda's attorney had suggested. What I did was spend the next 3 weeks finishing what I had already mostly finished. The furniture that mattered was already gone. The closets were mostly bare. The remaining boxes were few. I arranged to have the mail forwarded. I called my doctor and asked for a referral to a practice in Midcoast, Maine. There was a good one in Rockport, not far from Pembroke. I called the woman at my bank and had a quiet conversation about accounts and addresses and certain arrangements that had been in place for some time. I left on a Tuesday morning in early April, when the forsythia in the front yard was just beginning to bloom tiny yellow flowers against the gray of a New Jersey spring, which is not yet fully spring but has stopped being fully winter. I did not leave in anger. That was important to me. I walked through every room and let myself feel what I felt the grief of leaving. The strange weightlessness of knowing I would not come back, the way a house holds you even when you are ready to be released. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. I touched the crack in the plaster near the back door and forgave it for never being fixed. Then I got in my car and I drove north. I arrived in Pembroke on a Tuesday afternoon with the light already going golden and the harbor flat and silver below the hill. Dorothy was on her porch when I pulled up, wearing her yellow jacket, holding 2 cups of coffee, and she walked down to my car and handed me one before I had even opened the door all the way. "Welcome home," she said. I stood on the hill above the harbor and drank my coffee and breathed the salt air and felt something I had not felt in a very long time, which was the particular freedom of being exactly where you chose to be, on your own terms, with no one's permission required. The house was waiting, just as she had said. The shutters on my little Cape-style house were dark green, like Dorothy's, because she had painted them herself, as a welcome gift. The previous fall, the kitchen had good light. The porch looked south toward the water. On the counter, in a small green vase, Dorothy had placed a handful of early daffodils she had cut from her garden that morning. I set my bag down and walked slowly through each room, and it was nothing like the last time I had walked through my house in Maplewood. This was not an ending. This was something else entirely. Daniel called on Sunday, as he always did. I let it ring once. Then I answered. "Hey, Mom," he said, the careful warmth that he deployed when Brenda was listening. "How's everything?" "I'm well," I said. "I'm actually in Maine." A pause. "Maine? What are you doing in Maine?" I'm home, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. What do you mean you're home? Your home is, he stopped. My home is where I decide it is, Daniel. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than I had heard from him before. Not the measured, prepared silence of a man working through a strategy, a genuine silence. The kind that happens when something lands in a way you were not expecting. The house in Pembroke, he said finally. His voice had changed. The one you and Dad? Yes. Since when? Since 2018. Your father and I bought it together. He loved it here. I heard something shift in him. I heard it because I am his mother, and I have known the texture of his voice since before he could speak. There was a long quiet, and then he said, I didn't know. No, I said. You didn't. Mom, he stopped. Started again. Brenda thought. I know what Brenda thought. I kept my voice even. Not cold, not angry, just clear. I want you to understand something, and I want you to really hear it. Your father worked for 40 years. He paid for that house in Maplewood, and he paid for this one. And at the end of his life, what he wanted more than anything was for me to be free to live the way I chose to live. That is what I am doing. Another silence. Is the Maplewood house, what are you going to do with it? I haven't decided yet. That is also my decision to make. He exhaled. It was a sound I recognized, the sound of a man releasing something he has been holding for a long time, though he may not have known he was holding it. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, and I believe he meant it. There was no Brenda in his voice in that moment, just my son, just Daniel, who has his father's eyes and his father's stubbornness and, somewhere underneath all of it, his father's decency. I'm sorry about all of it. I just didn't want— I know, I said, and I meant that too. Come visit. Bring the kids. The house has a porch that looks out over the water, and I think you'll love it the way your father did. He said he would. I believe he will. Dorothy came over that evening, and we sat on the porch with glasses of wine, while the last of the light left the harbor, and the water turned from silver to gray to dark. The lobster boats were coming in. Somewhere down the hill, someone was playing music, something quiet and brass and old. The air smelled like low tide and wood smoke. How do you feel? Dorothy asked. I thought about it. I thought about the letter in the kitchen drawer, the one from the estate attorney, which I had brought with me for no reason except that it seemed important not to leave it behind. I thought about the oak tree I would not see bloom this spring. I thought about Robert's hands and the crack in the plaster and 41 years of ordinary Saturdays that had made up something extraordinary. Like myself, I said. I feel like myself. Dorothy raised her glass. I raised mine. Below us, the harbor lights came on one by one in the gathering dark, each one a small point of brightness against the evening, and I sat on my porch in my own house that I had chosen and paid for and filled slowly with the things that mattered, and I thought that Robert had been right. I was stronger than I had known. I had just needed to find out for myself. The music from down the hill drifted up through the salt air. The harbor was quiet. I was home. There is something I want to say to anyone who might be listening. Anyone who recognizes something of themselves in this story. Anyone who has ever sat in a kitchen wondering if the life they built still belongs to them. It does. It always did. The people who love you, truly love you, do not need to manage you. They do not send attorneys. They do not forward articles about downsizing or call your independence a burden that needs to be solved. Real love makes space. Real love asks what you need, and then trusts you when you answer. Robert knew this. He knew it in the way he held my hand in the car on that last drive home. He knew it in the way he walked onto Dorothy's porch and breathed the Maine air and said a person could breathe here. He built me an escape, not because he thought I would need to run, but because he knew that freedom, the real kind, not the kind someone grants you, but the kind you claim for yourself, requires somewhere to go. I am 67 years old. I know how to replace a light bulb, and take out the garbage, and manage a thermostat I have never used before. I know how to pack what matters and leave what doesn't. I know how to drive north in April when the forsythia is blooming, with my copper pot in the back seat and a key in my pocket and a friend waiting on a hill above the harbor with 2 cups of coffee. I know how to begin. And if you are sitting somewhere right now wondering whether it is too late, whether the years have made you too tired or too small, or too much a part of someone else's plans, I want you to hear me when I say, it is not. It is not too late. The porch is there. The harbor is there. The light is there every morning, blue and clean through the east window. You just have to choose to go.